On May 8, 1945, the most terrifying naval force on planet Earth simply gave up. Within hours of Nazi Germany signing its unconditional surrender, Admiral Karl Donitz issued a historic, humiliating order across the radio waves. All U-boats are to cease operations, surface immediately, and surrender to the nearest Allied port. Imagine being an Allied patrol pilot flying over the North Atlantic that day. Below you, the ocean begins to boil. Breaking through the freezing waves are more than 150 heavily armed, battle-scarred German U-boats. Their exhausted, starving crews climb out of the steel tubes and hoist white flags into the wind. The Wolfpacks that had terrorized the globe and nearly starved Great Britain to death had finally been leashed. But this unprecedented mass surrender created a massive, bizarre problem for the Allies. What do you do with a captured fleet of 150 underwater killing machines? You don't just put them in a museum. You steal their cheat codes, and then you orchestrate the largest, quietest mass execution of naval hardware in human history. This is the story of Operation Deadlight, the uranium ghost ship, and how the dying breath of the German Kriegsmarine accidentally jump-started the Cold War. By the autumn of 1945, harbors across Scotland and Northern Ireland were choked with German steel. At Loch Arabole alone, nearly 40 U-boats were anchored side by side in a grim parade of defeat. But keeping a highly complex, 700-ton submarine afloat is incredibly expensive. They require constant maintenance, pumping, and specialized engineering. The Allies couldn't afford to store them, and they certainly couldn't allow them to exist in a post-war world. So, the Royal Navy approved a brutal solution: Operation Deadlight. The plan was simple. They would tow 116 of these surrendered U-boats 100 miles northwest of Ireland out into the deep, unforgiving Atlantic and deliberately sink them. It was a naval execution. Between November 1945 and February 1946, the Royal Navy began dragging the rusting hulks out to 3 designated dumping zones: XX, YY, and ZZ. But the ocean had other plans. These U-boats were in dreadful condition. They had been starved of spare parts for months, battered by depth charges, and subjected to quiet sabotage by their own furious crews. As the British tugboats dragged them into the stormy winter seas, the German steel simply gave up. Ballast tanks ruptured. Seized engines tore apart. Out of the 116 submarines marked for execution, an astonishing 56 of them never even made it to the target zones. They simply foundered and snapped their tow lines, dragging themselves down into the abyss. The Royal Navy didn't even bother trying to recover them. Their mission was destruction, not preservation. For the U-boats that actually survived the tow, the end was violent. Allied destroyers and frigates used them as target practice, blasting them apart with naval gunfire, aerial rockets, and explosive charges. By February 1946, the Atlantic had swallowed the Wolfpacks whole, but the Allies didn't sink all of them. Because hidden among the rusting fleet was a technological system update that terrified the victorious nations. To understand why the Allies were so desperate to steal German submarine technology, we have to look at the massive flaw of World War II submarines. During World War II, a submarine wasn't actually a true submarine. It was a submersible boat. It operated primarily on the surface using diesel engines, and only dove underwater for brief, terrifying periods to attack or hide, crawling along on weak electric batteries. But at the very end of the war, Germany introduced the Type XXI Elektroboot. It was an absolute aerodynamic alien. The Type XXI was the world's first true submarine. It was designed to fight, live, and hunt entirely beneath the waves. It was so incredibly advanced that it rendered every Allied submarine completely obsolete overnight. When the Tripartite Naval Commission divided the surviving spoils of war, the US, the UK, and the Soviet Union each grabbed a handful of these advanced Type XXI boats. They weren't trophies, they were blueprints for the future. The Soviets completely dissected their captured Type XXI hulls, plate by plate. They reverse-engineered the massive battery capacities, the pressure-resistant architecture, and the snorkel systems. They used this exact stolen German DNA to build their terrifying Whiskey-class submarines. In a bitter twist of historical irony, the exact same German engineering that had just finished hunting American and British supply convoys was now fueling the Soviet Union in the dawn of the Cold War arms race. Germany's final wartime invention literally became the blueprint for the nuclear submarine age. While the Soviets were stealing the Type 21, the Americans captured the ultimate wild card, U-234. U-234 was a massive, long-range cargo submarine. On May 14, 1945, she surrendered to the U.S. Navy while en route to Imperial Japan. When American engineers cracked open her cargo holds, they didn't just find standard military supplies. They found a highly classified payload that included advanced German jet engine components, technical drawings, and most chilling of all, 1,200 pounds of uranium oxide. Hitler's regime had been secretly attempting to supply the Japanese Empire with the raw materials needed for advanced weapons of mass destruction. U-234 was carefully studied by U.S. Navy engineers. Its deadly cargo was quietly absorbed into the American military-industrial complex, and the submarine itself was eventually blown up during a torpedo test in 1947. Today, the legacy of the U-boat fleet exists in two completely different worlds. Above the water, a tiny handful of survivors exist as eerie, claustrophobic museums. The U-505, captured flawlessly in battle in 1944, sits meticulously restored inside the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the first enemy warship ever permanently displayed on American soil. In Germany, the U-995 rests on a beach in Lebow, allowing visitors to step inside the terrifying steel tube where 45 men lived, sweat, and fought for weeks at a time. But below the water, the truth is much darker. Between 2001 and 2003, deep-sea maritime archaeologists used advanced sonar to map the seabed northwest of Ireland. In the freezing Atlantic mud, they found the forgotten victims of Operation Deadlight. They found at least 14 intact U-boat hulls. Because the scuttling in 1945 was done so hastily, many of the submarines sank perfectly upright. Today, they sit in the darkness, their decks still armed with anti-aircraft guns, their steel encrusted with deep-sea coral. They are the silent tombstones of a catastrophic conflict. Over 30,000 German submariners and tens of thousands of Allied sailors never returned from the Battle of the Atlantic. The rusted wrecks of Operation Deadlight form one of the largest underwater graveyards on the planet. They are a haunting reminder of a mechanized empire that terrorized the world, accidentally designed the future, and was ultimately executed by the very ocean it tried to conquer. If the bizarre, untold aftermath of the German U-boat fleet changed how you view the end of World War II, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that the real, unpolished history of technology and warfare deserves to be heard. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the archives.